There we are. Woo! Okay, so we are here this week for this our Live Well Happy Hour, and this one is going to be on reading. And Cindy and I have been talking about, oh my gosh, we only have like a million topics we could choose from, but this one is like a really kind of a fun topic, but we're not going to necessarily be as heavy in, say, information, but more sharing our stories. We'll share some benefits, you know, of reading and some stuff around that. I guess like just the topic, because reading is such a powerful activity that we can do, and we talk, everything is like investing in yourself and about self-care, and reading is just one of those things that has made such a huge impact in my life. And I think you guys will be interested to hear, you know, the story that I hated reading and now I love reading. So, you know, that's kind of interesting. And Cindy has sort of a different experiences as well. So hopefully something will hit each of you. Maybe some of you love to read already. That's fantastic. Maybe you don't. And everywhere
It'd be nice
in
to hear
between.
some stories too.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would love that. That would be a lot of fun. Because again, you know, this is meant to be to some degree interactive, like get you thinking about stuff, things that we can do that reading doesn't really, my gosh, it can actually be free. I mean, we got libraries, there's so many free resources today. It's crazy. So it doesn't, this is something that anybody literally can do. So you guys have met us, right? I'm Jennifer. This is Cindy. I'm thrilled to have Cindy join me for many of our Live Well Happy Hours. So this has been fantastic. And we think a lot alike, which is a lot of fun. And we play off each other pretty good, I think. So Cindy, tell us a little bit about your, let's start out with sharing sort of your experience, your lifelong kind of experience with reading. Play that out.
Well, I remember, well, it's always been a big part of my family life. I remember my dad was the chosen one to read us a book before he went to bed. So it would be, you know, and no matter how old you were, it was, you know, like, and I remember actually being able to identify certain words just by sitting and reading a book. And as a little kid, you want to read the same book. I don't know if you did that, Jennifer, but you want to read the same book because you want to read, like both my parents were very big readers also. So you wanted to read, you wanted to, you know, like be able to do it yourself. So yeah. I remember like after a couple, well, more than a couple times reading the same book, you know what's going to happen the next. So, and then you tend to recognize some of the words. So even as a 4-year-old, like you're recognizing the, at, the little teeny weeny ones.
Yeah.
And I always found my imagination would go wild reading a book. Like I love the books with all the pictures and, you know, things that you could pick out. Like while my dad would be reading the words, sometimes I was just looking at the pictures and seeing all that stuff. So I did, or Dan and I did do that with our own kids.
Yeah.
And one is a reader and one wasn't a reader, but now he, well, he's not a reader like we're readers. Like I read every night before I go to sleep. I read for self-development. I read for pleasure. I read like poetry. I just like reading.
Yeah.
And as a kid also, I remember, and I still have one, making my own storybooks, like with pictures, because I've always been like the creative one, the art person. So I remember actually illustrating books when I was little. So it was, that was a big, and I'm a reader now, and Danny is also a reader. So it's really funny when you have one little kid that's like soaking up everything, like chapter books, the whole thing, like you couldn't get it to her fast enough. And then I had my son, who it was, Danny and I would think, okay, how are we going to get him to read? Because I really do think it's important, just for imagination and for focus and for like stimulating your brain and for vocabulary and everything. Like it's just a good thing. And so what we used to do, and I can't remember the name of the magazine. Remember that science magazine that used to come through the school? Do you remember that one?
A science magazine.
Well, it had like all different puzzles and I'm
Highlights?
dating myself too because
No,
it's probably
I
not
think
even
of
in the school.
highlights when I'm
Yes,
thinking of
that's
that.
it.
But
That's
is
it.
it
That's
highlights?
it.
Okay, yeah,
So it
a
had
great name.
everything.
Yep.
And that did it for a while, but didn't really grab him. But one thing about Nick was he was very big into sports.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, so then I got a subscription to the Junior Sports Illustrated,
Yeah.
and he devoured those. So
Nice.
that kept him reading a little bit.
Yeah.
He was terrible reader in school also, just
Yeah.
terrible. But I mean, I
Well, and
still,
sometimes people have issues with reading and that's not identified. So then it can't be, if we don't identify that
it's
there's an issue, we can't fix the issue, right?
it's more focus. I found
Yeah,
it was
well,
more
that happens
focus.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
So,
put that in the list of
but
issues.
we continued, and he would, have to expect it.
Yeah.
The story reading before bed. All like I can't even remember for a long time.
Yeah.
But Kim kind of took over for herself because then she started in with the chapter books like really
Right.
early, as I recall, really early. And I'd go in there and she'd still have her light on reading. So that's
Fun.
kind of cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
that is. Well, and it's fascinating when you think just the evolution of it, right? I mean, we're talking about reading and it's like, well, reading for ourselves, but then also paying that forward because I don't know who doesn't do that to some degree, right? I said, I'm such a big fan of the paying it forward. When there's something that you found value in, how do we not tell somebody else or share that with somebody, and especially our children, right? I mean, when you see that, the benefit for yourself. I think you mentioned, Cindy, that there was somewhere along the way that you kind of lost your interest in reading.
I did when I had stuff that I was supposed to read.
Oh, now
When
you're talking my language. Yeah.
yeah, when I started school,
Yeah.
maybe probably not in the younger grades because
Yeah.
like we had Dick and Jane and all those ones. They were fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But more so when you started studying.
Yeah.
And you had to read a book. And I was pretty good with English, but if and to this day I'm the same way. If I don't, I'll read a book. Somebody else can really read it, or really like it, but I sometimes don't. So, and there's certain thing like if it doesn't speak to me, it doesn't speak to me.
Right.
But I do like now when I read, if I start one, I cannot just read a couple pages and say, oh, I don't like that and put it down. I can't do that. I have to read it from cover to cover. That was probably instilled in me.
Wow, I wish I had that. Man, I could
Yeah.
have 90 books on the go and I sometimes don't get to the end.
And I guess the reading in school, if I had an interest in the subject, no problem. Like history, English, no problem. Science, like that kind of stuff. Oh my, or certain novels that you had to read, that's on the curriculum in schools when we went.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I can absolutely relate with that.
Yes. Yeah. So,
I had more Cole's book of notes than you can possibly imagine because,
yes.
I had assignments to do, but I didn't read that book.
And that's how my son used to do it with the Cole's book.
Yeah,
but
it is what it is, man. I tell you, it doesn't matter. I wasn't going to be an English student, so it didn't matter in the grand scheme of it.
And didn't you find too, Jennifer, like when I had my kids, when you first have them, you can't focus on anything but your kid and looking after, like your focus gets a little bit, I don't know, mine just, I couldn't read.
Yeah.
And then after they got a certain age,
yeah.
I remember talking to my mother-in-law, I think it was, and she said, you don't read. And I said, well, I used to, but I haven't found a book that I liked in a long time. And she gave me a book, and it was more like a history, romance, like way back in the 1600s kind of book. And I just lapped that. And then I found what I liked. And I think that's the thing.
I do too.
And of course, reading books like university books and stuff like that. Well, that was what I picked for my career. So I enjoyed psychology and I enjoyed all those books.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. And that's it's interesting. Now, when I think about my journey, kind of similar, I probably had I don't know if I started it with less love and really fell out of, I'll say fell out of love or just downright hated reading. I don't know. I really, even into an adult, really believed I hated reading. As a kid, read books, of course, storybooks. It was easy and that was fun. And yes, my parents read, or my grandparents or whatever. And I also had family members that were really great storytellers in many ways.
Yes.
I am very visual as a person, but I am very auditory as well. And I really enjoyed hearing the storytelling, and with no pictures, because I made the pictures in my mind. And, I just was completely enthralled. Some of them were just like, honestly, it was such a talent of theirs that they should have written books, or back in the day, I guess, had the technology really been there, they should have been like doing audio books or doing like anything. Like, they just had such a
They
talent.
did. My mom, well, she had 4
We've
kids.
talked about that.
Yes, my mom was awesome. She made up stories that I'm trying right now. I'm trying for her to remember one of the stories, because I would like to actually do it up.
Yeah.
But they were fun.
Oh,
And then you could change the outcome if you wanted to. It was awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they thought on the spur of the moment, or maybe they could read your body language. I have no idea, but I was always like captivated, absolutely captivated. But after the storybook season of your life kind of thing, I was not interested in anything really. I mean, until, gosh, I would have to say, again, schooling later, university, taking, again, classes that I'd be passionate about, and lots of classes I was not, as that's what education often is. But all through, and like you say, I probably didn't even like it in elementary. Maybe in primary. That would be because it's just kind of a fluffy joke in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, I already knew how to read when I went to school, right? A lot of that. So my mom had been a teacher and she had all these things, and I was doing work like at home, writing and all this kind of stuff, doing, printing and write like cursive and all that kind of stuff before I even went to school. And maybe that was part of it for me. Maybe I was just bored. I'm not sure. But anyway, all through school, it was the forcing you, I guess, to read stuff that I just had zero interest in. It would either be the level or the content, or it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. And I don't want to pick it apart. I don't love English. Yes.
Oh, I love English.
I can write. Like, I can do all these things. I would rather talk. I think I'm probably maybe more gifted that way than I am. And of course, I thought I hated public speaking.
I got to laugh
time,
at that one.
What's that? Yeah. No, I don't like to talk. No. Well, I come from a long line of talkers, so I don't know. I said I repressed that for a long time and didn't think I liked to do that either. But anyway, sometimes you can't shut me up, clearly. But the reading piece, yeah, like all through school, you say, oh my gosh, like Shakespeare, and I mean, this stuff was like pulling teeth out of my head. Like, I say, Cole's Book of Notes. If it wasn't for that, I would never have had an assignment done. Not interested at all. And to the point that it must have become enough of a habit that my inner dialogue changed, or maybe it never changed. It was created, solidified, that I had this absolute belief, like a core belief, that I hated to read.
Yes.
So when you have that kind of belief, who's running out to a store to get a book, or, whatever, for any reason? I just didn't. And again, not that I couldn't read, I wasn't going to choose to read. And that was a real shame, really, when I think back now, because for me personally, through university and stuff like that, yes, more so psychology, things of interest. The rest of it, I'm telling you, again, you went through it, but I didn't love it. I love sciences and I love psychology. So those things, totally, I like to put it all together. I can almost mind map it and see where they connect, and I love that. But then after that, I was interested, and I say that I was interested in personal development, self-care, all that kind of stuff. I was interested for a really long time. So I acquired information, but I never really put it into practice until roughly 15 years ago when I really dove into my personal development journey and, you know, through my business and stuff. And the funny thing is, I could eat books. I sometimes read them from cover to cover. That's not always my purpose because I may not necessarily need to read the whole book to get what I want to get out of the book. Do you know what I mean? So it really depends.
What was the book that sparked your self-development journey?
So probably the one, and I know we've talked about this before, the one that really started it all, and it was something that was really necessary in my life at the time. It was called The Dance of Anger. And the book literally changed my life. I can't even tell you how many times I've shared that book with people. Like you need to read that book, or I'll recommend it to people. And it, like, think we've talked about this briefly before. Maybe I've dabbled with it in conversation in our happy hours, but I never associated myself with, say, being angry, but I was other words that you could use for that. I was frustrated and different things. My dad had passed away at that time, maybe 10 years, something like that. I had been a big confidant for my mom. Her and I were very close. There was some dynamics going on with, you know, family and different things over the course of time, and different things I was noticing with friends, what I say, friends by default versus friends by choice. Like when you get to that point in your life where you're like, I've outgrown a relationship, but sometimes we used to keep them. And I say this with love because honestly, it's just people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And different people play different roles, and you play a different role in people's lives. So there's sometimes people need to leave for whatever reason. And I had evolved past some relationships, but I was finding that I was still getting together with them and leaving very frustrated. And, you know, so there was a lot of things. It had become a pattern. Let's just say a pattern in my life, that when this book was introduced to me, I was like, it was such a game changer of recognizing this dance that we do in relationships. And what it did is it sort of helped me navigate it more successfully so that I could be, at the end of the day, happier for it. And ultimately, you know, be more in control of my experience of my life, kind of thing. The book, like, changed everything. And I just want to say that book, now there's a whole bunch of books that Harriet Lerner has wrote, and I just shared them with my son. And I said, I know they're written, I even said to Jacob, I'm like, these are written in a perspective of a woman, but I want you to know the skills are applicable to men. And as well, you'll also understand how other people are, you know, let's say women, right, are thinking, right? How we kind of do things. So, and he's
what a great tool for him.
Right? I'm like, this is just, it's brilliant. But it's really interesting that you talked about before. So that's kind of my trajectory of, you know, reading. And somewhere along there, 15 years ago, Jacob is now, he'll be 19 in December next month. So I had, of course, done the storybooks in the beginning when he was young and that kind of stuff. And, you know, I had done a few things different than I was raised, you know, how I was raised kind of thing. But Jacob was a kid who could take really good direction, funny enough. So nighttime schedule became his. From 2.5 years of age, he put himself to bed. I never put him to bed after that. I would go in and read a book, but I wouldn't necessarily stay. He would leave his lights on, and he could have everything in his bed. He just had to stay there. So he listened to audiobooks all the time. I mean, all the time, every night, and sometimes be playing all day long.
Oh my gosh, Jennifer, do you remember Teddy Ruxpin?
Oh, yes.
My kids had Teddy Ruxpin, yeah. That's the bear that told the story.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, all good. But Jacob would have his bed floating in books. And he, you know, I'm sure it started out more as pictures in the beginning, but Jacob became an incredible reader, like an incredible reader. He's got better comprehension. I think that was part of my issue as a kid too, is I didn't necessarily have great comprehension, because I don't read for fun, even though I find what I read fun, more like sink my teeth into. I love learning about things I'm interested in, but I don't necessarily read for entertainment's sake.
Okay.
Not that that's a bad thing. I just don't. But I read books like workbooks. So I can see why I wouldn't have liked that in school, because you're not going to, well, I was not going to be an English student, so I was not going to dive into Shakespeare and eat it alive, like the book, just like, no, it didn't suit me at all. But if it's about me or getting better or communication skills or like stuff that can impact relationships or life, I'm like, I'm all in.
What about
So,
poetry?
I can appreciate poetry, but I have to say that probably school squashed some of that for me too, because a lot of my teachers, that was just my experience, because I never did English in university or anything. So this was, school, regular school. And they had an idea, like you read a poem and you're supposed to know what the poet was thinking when they wrote the poem, but you might not have read anything to say this is what they were thinking. Do you know what I'm saying? So I was like, I just felt like, well, you can't win there. Like, I can't win because maybe I saw something different when I read that, but I don't know what somebody else thinks. I've always said, I'm not a mind reader. Like, I have no idea, and I'm not interested in figuring out what somebody else saw. It's like looking at art. When I look at abstract art, that's great that the artist had a thought that created that. It's awesome. But I don't get it unless you tell me what that is. Like, to me, that's very concrete, but it's about how it makes me feel.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I work over there in that world of how that makes me feel, but when somebody tells me I need to be concrete and over here, I don't like that very much. So that kind of squashed I do have a favorite poem. Two roads diverged into a yellow wood. I chose the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. Robert Frost. I love that poem. But yeah, other than that, like, man, she's some limited, poetry is not something I necessarily go after. Do you love poetry?
I do.
You are a total creative.
I am. That's the thing. I used to write poetry too, and
nice.
I was a letter writer when I was younger too.
Yeah.
So like all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Listen, I think at the end of the day, language, and this is something that I've really realized, again, in the past 15 years of building my business and really focusing so much on communication, right? Like me trying to get better at this, as well as, as you learn something, you start to recognize things in other people, right? And sort of like how this happens, how all of this happens. And there's nonverbal language, there's verbal language, there's written language, but all of it is how we communicate with one another. It's so powerful, and it can be used really well, or what I've come to realize, it can be used really lazy.
Well,
like we can be super lazy with our language, and then miscommunications happen, and then it's a shame.
Don't you find too that when you were going through school, you had, like you're saying too, like the interpretation of the poem, like, and you had to be on the same wave as
there was no room for interpretate, like personal.
Yeah,
which was very unfortunate.
I was very fortunate that I had like future thinking teachers, I guess, because you could actually say what you interpreted in that poem, and she would go, "Oh, I never thought of that." Like stuff like that. So, I mean,
that's really great.
Because
educators play a huge role in that, and I think, and I just want to say, at the end of the day, I didn't like reading because of school, and yet I've learned to love reading. So it's never too late. Anything can change, right? It's about changing your mind about how you sort of look at something, and everything can change from there. But when I think about women, men, right, parents, we're teachers in a sense, right? Because we're the ones that sort of plant those seeds that something can be fun. I remember with Jacob, just talking about the material I made available to him in the beginning was totally focused on whatever it was that sparked him. And I would take him to bookstores and libraries, and you pick out what sparks you. I didn't project myself or my thoughts of where he should be or what he should read. I stayed out of it. You pick whatever you want. And it was everything from what were they? He did highlights too. He loved highlights, especially those search and finds and all those little things too. But Sonic the Hedgehog, and I mean, he was reading like comics, and I mean Garfield. We would buy these like thick huge books, and he would have it devoured in a flash and then read it 9 million more times. And, you know, and then as a teenager, he would be reading chapter books. And again, his comprehension's crazy because he could sit down and tell you all about it and the tangled web of the story. I'm like, wow, like clearly your comprehension is way better than mine. Like, it's crazy. And then he was reading stuff, even like kids. There's people online that write, and they're not published or anything like that, but there's people on that just write. And Jacob would go and like read their stuff, like devour it, and then be devastated when it comes to an end. And I'm like, wow, like somewhere along the way, I don't know if I could ever repeat that with another child or anything like that, but it worked out because he does have such a passion for reading, and he's really good at it, which is awesome. But yeah, I see it as a huge tool in so many, it impacts so many aspects of our life. But you know what? Okay, so is there anything else when I talk about a story, and we'll chime off, and then we'll be coming back and sharing some other things.
The only thing that I wanted to actually following up on just what you said, don't you think that the screen time that all the kids are allowed to have, and all the extracurricular activities, geez, I can't talk, kind of interfere with the reading a little bit?
Yeah. And that's an interesting way to look at that too. And I would have to agree that somewhere along the way, even as, you know, adults, and I wasn't raised in a time of all the tech, clearly, you know what I mean? Like TV was a pretty limited affair when we were young, right? I mean, stuff like that, you know, tech has certainly come into our lives, and we're having a hard time managing tech in our lives, and they've known nothing but tech since, you know, really they were young. Now your kids are older, right? But still, tech has certainly come into their lives, and like you say, if it's not TV, or it's something, phones,
I didn't
iPads,
have
you name it.
I didn't have the added like responsibility, I guess I would call, of limiting screen time with my kids, because that, like,
it's an extra parenting thing that you have to do.
Oh,
it was not part of the picture before.
Yeah.
When I think of when Jacob was younger, I was managing other things, but this is something that's on top of, like, it's not, and I mean, it's something that unless you sort of, I don't know, somebody parented you through that, you're kind of hit and miss we're just trying to figure it out, right? And I truly believe parents are doing the best they can with what they have to work with. And, you know, I remember, because Jacob
it's a good thing too.
Don't get me wrong, Jacob loves his technology. So I remember teachers would say to me different times, you know, you go to parent teacher or whatever, and they would say, I don't know, there'd be certain teachers, see, that would let them, when you're done your work, and Jacob has always done his work in class. So he was done. He's sitting there, and the teachers, some of them would let you use technology in class. So this was when from grade 6 on, he had to have an iPad at school. So it was just part of, everybody had an iPad. If you couldn't afford one, they provided an iPad for you, but everybody had to have an iPad. And I remember the teachers would say to me something about, you know, working with Jacob to get him to sort of shut the technology off or whatever. And I said, I'll parent at home. And say, here, I said, you guys, I would never have sent technology to school with him. Not at this, not at grade 6. And you guys said he had to have it. So you're going to have to figure that out in your classroom. That'll be your job, not mine. And I'll figure out how it's done at home. But at the end of the day, some of his teachers used that as a tool so he wasn't getting into trouble with something else, you know what I mean? But he had to do something educational, whatever. I said, but there's a thing. I mean, technology certainly is something, doesn't matter if it's reading or whatever you're doing on technology, but it's a whole other layer of parenting, right? But yeah, kids these days, you know, I mean, they don't know how to slow down. We're having a hard enough time slowing down. And it's really important, and reading on different platforms, or reading as a, you know, as a tool, slows you down, which is really good. There's a lot of things where slowing down, it unleashes creativity and so many other things.
Yeah. It does. It slows their minds down at night. Like they're just reading a nice little book and they're going to sleep. They're not the screen time and technology is a stimulator.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong too, because I mean, I love my technology, but
And we're on tech right now.
yeah, and I do see how that has somehow taken over a bit of my reading. So I've been trying to go back to what I used to do more.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yep.
still use it, but maybe not as much.
Yeah. It's so true, and it's funny, and I'll mention that maybe in another recording too that we do, because there was something that I learned about reading that stuck with me, and I'll share it in another recording, but and then we can talk about that, because there's so much more, and we don't want this recording to be too long, but
No, that's true.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing your story, and
Oh, you're welcome.
hope that everybody just, I don't know, got some little nugget, maybe see your story and our stories and recognize we're all kind of the same, right?
And share some for us.
Yeah,
Share
exactly.
your stories so we can look at that.
Absolutely. It's so what's your thoughts on reading, right? Where does it fit in your life, or does it fit in your life? Would you like it to fit in your life a little bit more? And let's keep that conversation going. All right, so we'll sign off, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
I'm not shutting it off.